And I think it's very hard as a founder to kind of psych yourself up about this idea, to go and quit your job or raise friends and family money and convince people that you've got something going, and all of those people are really, really supportive. I started a business, my mom told me what a great idea it was. She did not provide any constructive or critical feedback, and yet somehow, despite my mom thinking it was a really, really great idea, I failed at my startup. Right? So apparently I didn't get as much from that fundraising process as I could have gotten. In fact, most of the people that I pitched when I founded my company wrote a check. And they essentially wrote a check basically based on the high-level idea and who I was and the fact that they knew me and they thought I was credible, but no one really drilled in to some of the specifics that would have been really helpful to me as a founder. And the few people who said no, my reaction to them was like, oh, well, that guy doesn't know what he's talking about. I mean, it's very easy to pitch a VC who says no and walk away and come up with all sorts of reasons why they say no that has nothing to do with maybe my idea is unworkable. The vast majority of people that I say no to, very few of those people says, hey, you know, you're right. That thing that you just said that I don't have a really great answer to, we need to work on that. We need to figure that out. We'll come back and we'll give you the answer. I hear through the grapevine all sorts of stuff about why we don't invest. Oh, I heard you didn't invest in that startup because it was too early. Really? Too early? Because I've literally invested in a company before there was a PowerPoint deck. So I don't know how much earlier, I mean, I suppose you could do pre-founder, but that would be really weird. So if anybody comes to you and says, yeah, I pitched Charlie, he said it was too early, you know you're not getting the right answer. So how do you drill down to a no? First of all, don't take bullshit VC responses at face value. When somebody says to you, oh, that's too early, come back to them and say, well, what haven't we done yet, or what haven't we proven that you're questioning that we'll be able to do or not, right? So, for example, if you don't have any customers yet, ask them, hey, have you ever, first of all, you have to qualify your investors, and this is one of the reasons why people fail, is they're just pitching the wrong investors. Right? So make sure, before you take a meeting, right up front, say, hey, just want to be upfront, we don't have any customers yet. Or, we're consumer, we're not enterprise. Whatever you are, be very upfront about what you are, and ask, is this a fit for you? Have you ever invested pre-product, pre-revenue, pre-whatever, pre-$100,000 a month in MRR? So qualify that person and making sure you're pitching the right person. And if they say, well, opportunistically, we usually invest here, but opportunistically we'll look at something. Yeah, opportunistically when it's like their Harvard roommate, they'll also do it, but that doesn't qualify for you, right? So don't be afraid to push and ask those kind of questions. How many pre-product deals, how many pre-revenue deals, how many consumer deals or whatever have you done in the last year? So making sure to say, okay, like if I had a good enough pitch, I would have a good enough shot at winning this investor over, right? So once you get to that and you know that it's relevant, and they say something like, well, it's early, or is this a big enough market? Tell them why you believe something, why they don't believe something. So for example, well, I don't know about that market. Well, if you turn around and say, well, here's how we got to this market calculation. Is there something that you can identify here that's wrong with our thinking? Let me know, because I'm looking for specific feedback. So it seems like you have some market questions. This is why we believe in the market. Can you point out, what's wrong with our thinking here? What's not strong enough? Where do you think we'll fail? Do you believe that if we built this and we attempted to sell it on this or sell a customer, why would they say no? Do you know someone who is the target customer for this, that we could ask that question? use the fundraising process to strengthen the pitch. Too many times people go in with one standard kind of pitch. They give it to every single investor, and it's like, here's what I got, yes or no. Here's what I got, yes or no. Here's what I got, yes or no. And if you get 3 no's and the pitch didn't change at all, that's problematic. That's one of the reasons why people fail. Now, on the other side of that pendulum, don't change what you're doing just because a VC said no. If you look at the history of VCs turned founders, it's not that good. Like, we're no better at this than you are, right? And so the idea that VCs are really, really smart and they know your industry, they know how to build companies, is bullshit for the most part, right? We're good at vetting founders, at identifying whether your skill set matches the challenge at hand. We have some really big networks. We can be really helpful to companies, but we don't necessarily know your business better than you know it. So the idea that you go in and said, well, a bunch of VCs said this, so we changed our model. Well, maybe you weren't talking to the right VCs, or why did you believe in that in the first place? No, it's one thing if they provided some compelling evidence, or they gave you an idea, you went and you tested it, and you found out that, like, wow, they are right, that we should charge more for this product, because we talked to customers about it. But just because you're getting no's on the fundraising doesn't necessarily mean there's something wrong with what you're doing. If you're getting no's across the fundraising, there might be, but find out what that is. Maybe it's not the model or the product. Okay, so now you've avoided all those pitfalls. You're pitching the right VCs. You're improving with every pitch. Tactically speaking, why do people fail at fundraising? So one of the reasons they do is they just kind of run out of time or money, frankly. You leave your job, you've got this nice little 6-month nest egg that you've saved up to give you enough time to go pitch, and what happens? So you pitch a couple of people, you talk to 3, one just doesn't return your emails, another hands you off to the analyst, and no disrespect to analysts, I've been that guy at a fund, but we can't make decisions for the most part. And so they ask you a bunch of generic, recently graduated MBA questions. They come back and they ask you for your free meetings, but you're not getting traction. And then this other fund that you pitch, has some competitor that they can't invest in you because of that you didn't know about. Well, that whole process that I just described could take 3 weeks. And so now you go out and you find another 3, right? You say, oh, maybe I should go pitch another couple, maybe I'll pitch 5 this time, right? So you go out and the same kind of things happen. And maybe you get 2 interested people, but you're trying to raise $1 million, and the 2 interested people combine for $200,000, and neither of them leads, right? So, shoot, you gotta go out and find another 3 people. This whole process is really taking months, and the person up front who was kind of interested is now this round doesn't seem like it's going fast enough, there's no momentum in it. Now I'm kind of wavering because other VCs aren't jumping on this, and so maybe I'm not as excited about it as I was before. I made the same mistake as a VC fundraising. So nobody ever thinks about this, but VCs have to fundraise too. The money, the $15 million in Brooklyn Bridge Ventures is not mine. Some of it's mine, but most of it is for people who have a lot more money than I do. And so I went out and I pitched a couple of people, and I thought I had 2 whales. Somebody was going to write $1 million check, and then somebody else was asking questions like, what would it look like if we were a majority of the fund? So now I'm thinking, wow, this person's going to write a $9 million check. That's awesome, right? But they didn't say that. They were just asking questions along those lines. 5 months into my fundraising process, I still don't have money, and I still don't have a check, and I turn around and say, well, how do you close? How do we get to the end of a close? They said, oh, well, we have to hire the person who's the director of fund strategy, and that person's going to create a framework by which we're going to measure you against. Oh, so you don't even have the right decision maker on board yet. Great. When will that be? Oh, like maybe 5 or 6 months. I was like, oh, cool, September, that's awesome. How much money specifically are you thinking for this? $1 million. Oh, okay, so it's not $9 million in 3 weeks, it's $1 million 6 months from now, which, you know, still good, but not what I was thinking. I failed to do the sales 101 of asking questions like, what is your budget, what is your, you know, like what is your process? Process was the key word there, so I had to make sure the microphone picked it up. So if you're talking to an analyst, a principal, you need to understand how many people need to vote on this and approve it to get a check. How often do you meet? How does diligence usually take? All of those questions are key to understanding, do I have enough people in my pipeline? You know, what budget are you thinking? You know, you go pitch somebody like NEA, $1 million fund. They could do this whole round, thinking for your startup in particular. So maybe they're thinking of this, a seed. A question, yeah. Can you shout it out? No, you don't if it's not revenue, it's an investment. So you want to make sure that you have enough in the budget, so you got to create that Google sheet. It's a little premature for Salesforce at this point. Who am I pitching? What kind of numbers are they thinking about? And what's the percentage chance that they close? Don't walk out of a first meeting with an analyst and go, yeah, that's 50-50, it's down. You actually want to be conservative about it and say, hey, you know what, if I pitch 20 funds, maybe one of them will come through. So every time I pitch a fund and I get a next meeting, maybe that's a 5% chance. If I get a meeting with a partner, maybe for every fund where I get a chance to pitch a partner, I feel like I have a 1 out of 10 shot if the meeting goes well. So if the partner says, yeah, this is interesting, I'm going to multiply their $500,000 average bet times 10% chance of closing. And I add that all up, and if I'm trying to raise $1 million, I need like $10 million in the pipeline to even come close. And so I feel like a lot of startups aren't pitching enough at the beginning of the funnel, but then they're also not cutting down enough. You're taking 3-4 meetings and not understanding how close you are to getting to actually getting a check. You're not forcing the investors to a no. Asking questions like, why wouldn't you do this? So their pipeline is big, but it's just, you know, it's getting old, it's getting dusty. People seem interested, but they're not really committing. That's a great way to fail at your fundraising. Once you get into the pitch, I would say the #1 reason why VCs kind of, you know, don't get excited is a couple of things. Too many founders come in and they think that fundraising is a reward for prior accomplishment versus a ticket to the future. You come in and say, isn't it great that we got to break even? Well, yeah, I guess that's nice for you guys, like you're not going to go out of business right away, but that's not the exciting thing that I want to jump in on, right? So tell me what you're going to do with this money. Tell me about the next 18 months. Tell me what the Series A pitch is going to be like after you spend this seed round. And so I can kind of reverse engineer, is that a company that I want to be invested in over the next, 18 months? Your prior accomplishment is the proof that you can potentially get there, right? So if you say, hey, let me tell you about my plan to hire 5 salespeople and get to $200K a month in revenue, then we can go back and say, okay, you in your 50% time is this effective at closing, so I can extrapolate out that, here's how effective 5 actual salespeople might be. So I'm not necessarily going to be impressed by your bootstrap stage accomplishments, but they're good data to kind of figure out what you're capable of in the future. But you should be spending 80 to 90% of the time talking about your forward-looking plan versus what you're doing in the past. Two, I would say, a lot of founders haven't really spent enough time with customers and don't really understand the problem like kind of intuitively. They don't come off to me as someone who knows more about the problem than I do. Every single one of the founders that I have backed knows way more about their problem than I do. So if we're at a meeting and I say, hey, this is similar to what so-and-so was doing, or do you know this person who should know a lot about that particular thing? If your answers are, oh yeah, I never heard of them, or I don't know who that is, think about the numbers. I look at 2,000 things in a year and do 8 to 12 of them. So the bar that you have to be one of those companies is really hard. So those people are answering questions like, oh yeah, I know about that company that you mentioned. Here's specifically why we're different from them. Or yeah, I talked to that founder. This is what I learned from them. Or actually, yeah, that person is already an advisor. That person you were going to introduce me to is already on board with what we're doing. That's kind of the level that you need to be at. I want you to be the category expert, and if you're not, you need to get there on that and make sure that anything that I can kind of think of offhand is something you've already considered. Last thing, because I got like 58 seconds, and I don't know if I have like time for questions. Do we have time for questions, or you guys got it? No, okay. So last thing, but if anybody has any questions, you can tweet them at me. It's CEO NYC. Those are my initials. It's not as douchey as it sounds. And not asking for enough. Don't try and estimate what you think you can raise and sandbag the pitch. If $2 million is what you really, really need, say that. Because there are too many times where somebody comes in and says, yeah, I just need to hire an extra developer, an extra this, an extra that. If we just had 300 grand, if we just had 500 grand, and I always say the same thing back. If I gave you $1 million, would you know what to do with it? And everyone across the board always says, oh yeah, totally. Well, great. Well, why aren't you pitching for $1 million? Because we're in the business of trying to build really, really big businesses. Businesses that get to $100 million in revenue, that sell for at least $250 million or more. What is the right plan for your company? And most times it's not raising 250 grand just to get to break even. So convince me that you're coming in with the right number and you're doing what's appropriate for the company, not what you think. Because a lot of times it's actually easier to raise $1 million than it is to raise 250 grand. Thank you very much for your time. My email is charlie@brooklynbridge.vc. Happy to be helpful if I can. Thank you.